The council chamber was colder than the storms outside. Walls of blue ice curved high above the floor, glowing faintly with trapped light. The air was sharp and dry, every breath turning to mist that drifted and froze before reaching the ground. At the center of the room stood Captain Marcus Hale, the only human on Vrax Prime. He looked small compared to the towering alien judges surrounding him. Their skin shimmered like glass, their eyes hard and bright as frozen stars. They called themselves the Vraxian Council, rulers of this world of endless winter. And today they had gathered for one purpose, to decide whether a human deserved to live. The Prime Overseer rose, his voice cut through the air like ice cracking. "Captain Marcus Hale of Earth," he began, "you are accused of tampering with the colony reactor, endangering thousands of lives. Do you deny these charges?" Marcus's face was rough from months of windburn and cold. He stood straight, his shoulders stiff, his eyes steady. "I didn't tamper," he said quietly. "I repaired it. Your safety systems were failing. You were 3 minutes from meltdown." A low hiss rippled through the chamber. One of the judges slammed his staff. "Lies. The reactor has been stable for centuries." Marcus took a slow breath. Then maybe it was due for a failure. They didn't like that. He could feel it, the tension, the distrust. To them, humans were still the reckless newcomers of the galaxy, too emotional, too unpredictable, too alive. The Overseer's lips curled in disdain. "You humans always think chaos is creation. You interfere, you destroy what you don't understand. Your instincts make you dangerous." Marcus almost smiled. "Or maybe they make us survivors." The Overseer slammed his clawed hand on the ice podium. "Enough! You are hereby banished to the frozen zone. No shelter, no transport, no supplies. You will perish as nature intended." A hush filled the hall. Even the Vraxian guards shifted uneasily. The frozen zone was death, a wasteland of eternal blizzards and monstrous cold, where even Vraxian skin crystallized within minutes. Marcus didn't flinch. His jaw tightened, but he stayed calm. "If I make it back," he said, his voice echoing through the icy dome, "I'll bring you something warm." The Overseer sneered. "You won't make it back." 2 guards seized his arms, dragging him toward the massive steel gate at the far end of the chamber. The crowd of aliens parted, whispering in disbelief as the human passed. Some looked curious. Some looked afraid. None looked sorry. The gate opened with a roar of machinery, releasing a gust of wind so cold it burned his face. Beyond it stretched the horizon, a blinding white emptiness that went on forever. Mountains of ice, torn by storms. Skis so pale they looked dead. The guards shoved him forward. The moment he crossed the threshold, the gate slammed shut behind him with a thunderous clang. Silence, only the wind remained. Marcus stood there, breathing heavily, his coat whipping in the storm. The temperature dropped so fast his visor fogged over. He wiped it clean with his sleeve and looked at the endless expanse ahead. There was no sign of life, no hint of hope, just snow and death waiting patiently. He checked his gear. What little he had left after they stripped him down, a cracked thermal suit, a small pack of emergency gel, and his old wrist module, now half frozen. The map display flickered and died. "Figures," he muttered, "not even a proper send-off." He started walking, one slow step after another, boots crunching into the snow. The wind howled in his ears, screaming like a living thing. He wrapped his arms tight around himself, keeping his body heat in. He could feel his heartbeat pounding in his chest, fast and heavy. As hours passed, he stumbled through ridges of ice and powder that swallowed him up to his knees. He fell once, twice, each time pulling himself back to his feet, cursing softly under his breath. The sun, if it could be called that, hung low and pale, giving no warmth. By nightfall, even that weak light was gone, replaced by a sky of black crystal and drifting snow. He found a rock outcrop, barely enough to shield him from the storm, and collapsed behind it. His hands trembled violently. He tore open the emergency gel pack and smeared it over his suit's power vents. The faint heat it produced barely reached his skin, but it was something. He stared at the snow swirling around him, endless and merciless. He could almost hear the Overseer's words echoing through the wind. "You will perish as nature intended." Marcus exhaled, his breath freezing instantly. He pulled a small metal tag from his pocket, his old Earth military ID. He ran his thumb across the engraved words, "Captain Marcus Hale, United Earth Fleet." He smiled weakly. "I've been through worse." Somewhere deep inside, a stubborn fire still burned, the kind of fire only humans carried. The one that refused to go out no matter how cold the world became. He wasn't thinking about revenge or glory or survival, not yet. He was just thinking about one step, then another, then another. He tucked the tag back into his coat, pushed himself to his feet, and began walking again into the blizzard, into the unknown. The ice storm swallowed him whole, but his voice, small and hoarse, drifted into the wind. "You wanted me dead, fine, but you'll remember my name." The storm screamed louder as if trying to drown him out, but it couldn't. Because in the heart of the frozen world, something alive kept moving, one fragile, stubborn spark of humanity. And it refused to die. The first night nearly killed him. Marcus woke to the sound of his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. His entire body was shaking uncontrollably, his fingers too stiff to bend. Frost had formed over the inside of his helmet, and every breath came out as shards of pain. His emergency heater had died hours ago. He tried to move his legs but couldn't feel them. For a moment, panic took over, wild, desperate panic. The kind that claws at your chest and whispers, "You won't make it." But Marcus had been a soldier once. He knew fear, he also knew how to fight it. He punched his legs, forcing blood to move. He rolled over, groaning, and crawled out from behind the rock that had served as his shelter. The wind hit him like knives. The world was nothing but white, endless, empty white, stretching to the horizon. He started walking again, he didn't know where. There was no map, no path, no sun to follow, only the idea that if he stopped, he'd die. So he kept moving, one foot, then the other. Hours blurred into days. He learned to eat snow to stay hydrated, even though it numbed his throat. He tore open the lining of his coat to patch the cracks in his gloves. His body ached constantly. The cold wasn't just outside him anymore, it was inside, deep in his bones. One night he stumbled and fell face first into the snow. He didn't move for a long time. He was too tired, too cold. The thought came to him like a whisper, maybe this is it. He thought of home, of coffee steam curling in the air, of laughter in the mess hall, of the smell of metal and engine grease aboard his old ship. He thought of his crew. He thought of the sun. Then he clenched his teeth and forced himself up. "Not yet," he rasped. "You don't get to win that easy." He pressed on. By the fourth day, he found a cave, dark and narrow, half buried beneath a ridge of ice. He crawled inside, dragging his pack behind him. The temperature dropped less inside, and the wind softened to a dull howl. It wasn't comfort, but it was something close to shelter. He gathered what little he had, a broken plasma torch, some metal scraps, and the remains of his suit's power core. Using the torch's last spark, he managed to create a small flame that flickered weakly against the icy walls. For the first time in days, he felt warmth touch his face. He leaned against the wall, closing his eyes. "Still here," he whispered. Sleep came heavy and dreamless. When he woke, the cave was filled with dim blue light filtering through the ice above. He stretched, pain shooting through every muscle. Then he noticed something, a faint hum coming from deeper inside the cave. Cautiously, he followed it. The tunnel widened, opening into a small cavern. And there, buried under layers of frost and rock, was a piece of alien machinery, ancient, half-collapsed, but still faintly glowing. It was a reactor core. Marcus blinked, hardly believing it. The hum was steady, rhythmic, the heartbeat of power. He knelt beside it, brushing off the ice. His gloved fingers traced the metal. The symbols etched into it were Vraxian, but older, much older than anything he had seen before. He laughed, a dry, broken sound. "Well, I'll be damned," he said. "You just might save me." He spent the next few days working. His hands bled, his tools broke, and he burned through every bit of energy left in his torch. But little by little, the core began to respond. He rewired damaged circuits using strips of melted armor. He rerouted power through his broken wrist module. And when it finally pulsed with light, the entire cavern glowed like morning. Marcus sank to his knees, staring in awe as warmth filled the air. He laughed again, not weakly this time, but full and raw. "You see that, Overseer?" he shouted to no one. "You threw me into a freezer and I just built a heater." The sound of his voice echoed through the cave, bouncing off ice and stone. For the first time, it didn't feel like the world was trying to bury him. That night, he melted snow in a metal can and drank until his throat stopped aching. He set up makeshift walls using metal plating and lined them with insulation from his suit. The tiny base felt like a miracle, ugly, cold, and imperfect, but his. He had fire again, he had warmth, he had a reason to fight. Outside, the storm raged on, but Marcus no longer feared it. He sat beside the reactor, his eyes reflecting its glow, and whispered to the empty air, "If this world wants a war, it picked the wrong species." But the warmth drew attention. Somewhere in the distance, something howled deep, long, and inhuman. The sound carried through the night like thunder. Marcus froze, listening. Then came another and another. They weren't winds, they were voices. He rose slowly, gripping the metal pipe he'd been using as a walking stick. The howls grew closer, echoing through the cave mouth. Shadows moved against the light. Marcus took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and stood ready. He had survived the cold. Now he'd have to survive what lived in it. And as he faced the dark tunnel ahead, he felt something fierce stir inside him. Not fear, not anger, but the unbreakable fire of a man who refused to die quietly. The howls grew louder as the night deepened. Marcus gripped the metal pipe tighter, his heart thudding like a drum inside his chest. The sound came from the mouth of the cave, sharp, guttural cries that echoed across the ice. He stepped closer, the light from the reactor behind him flickering against the walls. Something moved in the shadows. At first, he thought it was the wind playing tricks on him. But then, two glimmering shapes appeared, tall, thin creatures with bodies made of translucent ice and long limbs that scraped against the ground. Their eyes burned faintly blue, like dying stars. Marcus exhaled slowly. "All right," he muttered, "let's dance." The first creature lunged. It moved with terrifying speed, slicing through the air like a blade. Marcus dodged, barely avoiding its claws. The impact shattered ice beside him, sending shards into his face. He swung the metal pipe in a wide arc. It hit the creature's arm with a loud crack, scattering pieces of it across the floor. The monster screamed, a sound that made his blood freeze. Another charged from the side. Marcus ducked and jabbed forward, the pipe punching through brittle ribs. The creature exploded into shards of glittering frost that melted against the warm air from the reactor. For a moment, the cave was still. Then a third one stepped into view, larger than the rest. Its mouth opened, revealing rows of crystalline fangs. Marcus backed toward the reactor, his breath ragged. He looked at the flickering lights on the panel, energy pulsing, wires sparking. He grinned through bleeding lips. "You want heat," he said hoarsely. "Let's turn it up." He slammed his hand against the control switch. The core roared to life, flooding the chamber with searing warmth. Steam burst from the walls, and the temperature spiked so suddenly that cracks splintered through the ice ceiling. The creature shrieked as its body began to melt. Marcus charged forward and struck it again and again until it shattered completely, falling apart into pools of clear water that hissed on the hot metal floor. Silence fell. Only the hum of the reactor and his heavy breathing filled the air. His body trembled from exhaustion. His hands were raw and red, blood mixing with melted ice. He sank to his knees, staring at the pile of broken shards around him. The creatures had been hunting him, drawn by the warmth. The frozen zone was alive, filled with predators that thrived on cold but couldn't stand the light of fire. He laughed weakly. "You wanted to kill me," he said to the empty air. "Instead, you taught me how to live." He spent the next few days fortifying his cave. Using pieces of the dead creatures and scrap metal, he built walls around the reactor and created barriers at the entrance. He sharpened ice shards into blades and rigged trip wires made from melted-down cables. The place started to look less like a hole in the ice and more like a small fortress. His fortress. Every day, he tested the limits of the reactor. He learned how to balance its power output without burning through the core. He scavenged the frozen plains for wreckage and found old Vraxian drones buried under layers of snow. He stripped them for parts, wires, fuel cells, processors, anything that could help him build something useful. He made lamps out of energy coils, a heater from an engine part, and even a small generator that powered his wrist module again. The holographic display flickered to life, showing the words, "System reboot successful." For the first time in months, Marcus saw his own reflection on the cracked screen. His beard was wild, his eyes hollow yet bright, a man carved by frost and fire. At night, he sat beside the reactor, watching its glow dance across the ice ceiling. The air smelled faintly of metal and ozone. He thought about the council, those cold, arrogant faces that had thrown him away. They believed humans were weak, fragile, unable to adapt. He smiled. "They really don't know us at all. One evening, while searching through a collapsed transport buried in the snow, Marcus found something strange. A small sealed container still intact. The label half-faded read Terran Expedition, Food Storage. He pried it open carefully. Inside were small vacuum-packed items, dehydrated meals, nutrient bars, and something that made him laugh until tears froze on his cheeks, a small brown packet marked coffee. He held it in his hand for a long moment. The familiar smell brought back memories, sunlight through a window, the hum of engines, the sound of laughter. It was a piece of earth in a place that had forgotten warmth. Back in his cave, he boiled snow water in a metal pot using the reactor's heat. When he poured in the coffee, the steam rose rich and dark, filling the cavern with a smell that didn't belong to this frozen world. He took a sip, bitter hot, perfect. And in that moment, Marcus Hale wasn't a prisoner or an exile. He was a human being, warm, alive, and defiant. He raised the cup toward the icy ceiling and whispered, "Here to survival." Outside, the wind screamed. The storm raged. But inside that cave, fire burned, the first human fire on Vrax Prime's dead lands. And in its light sat one man, smiling through cracked lips, the heat of defiance glowing in his eyes. He had turned ice into fire. And he wasn't done yet. The storm outside raged for weeks, but inside the cave, the air shimmered with life. Heat pulsed softly from the reactor, turning frost into gentle drips that echoed like rain. The cold was no longer his enemy. It was just a part of the silence he'd learned to live with. Marcus sat near the fire, his hands wrapped around a steaming mug. The bitter scent of coffee filled the air. It was weak, watery, almost tasteless, but it was coffee. And in this frozen wasteland, that was a miracle. He took a sip and sighed. "You see, Overseer," he murmured to the empty air, "humans don't die easy, we adapt. We find warmth even in hell." Around him, the small outpost had grown. The once bare cave was now lined with scavenged panels and dim lights powered by his patched generator. He had built a table from ship debris, a makeshift bed of thermal cloth, and shelves made of reactor plating. It wasn't beautiful, but it was home, his home. Every morning, he ventured out to scavenge from the wrecks scattered across the icy plains. The air was sharp, and the wind howled like an angry god, but he walked through it with purpose. His boots crunched over frozen ground as he searched for anything useful, wire, metal, parts of old drones. Sometimes he'd spot the shadows of the frost creatures watching him from a distance, their glowing eyes hidden among the snow dunes. But they didn't come close anymore. They had learned what fire could do. He returned each evening, his arms full of scavenged pieces, and spent the night repairing, inventing, improving. His hands were always covered in burns and cuts, his breath always visible in the cold air, yet his eyes burned with quiet determination. One night, as he was adjusting the reactor's settings, a strange sound echoed through the cave, a distant rumble that didn't come from the storm. He froze. The ground vibrated faintly under his boots. Marcus grabbed his pipe and flashlight, walking toward the cave entrance. The light flickered across the snow as he stepped outside. The storm had calmed, too calm. The air was still, silent. Then a shadow passed over him. He looked up. A massive ship, Vraxian Patrol class, was descending through the clouds, its engines glowing blue. His heart pounded. He hadn't seen another vessel since his exile. For a moment, he wondered if they had come for him, maybe to finish what they started. But as the ship hovered in the distance, it began to tilt, sputtering smoke. Then it crashed into the frozen plain with an explosion that sent waves of snow billowing across the horizon. Marcus hesitated. He knew what logic said, stay put, stay alive. But something human, something stubborn, made him grab his pack and run toward the wreckage. The wind bit at his face as he climbed over shards of ice and debris. The ship's hull was cracked open like a broken rib cage, flames flickering against the cold air. Inside, sparks rained down from broken cables. He heard a sound, a groan. Someone was alive. Marcus crawled through the wreck, pulling aside metal plates until he found a Vraxian officer pinned under a beam. The alien's breathing was shallow, his translucent skin cracked and turning white from exposure. Marcus dropped his pack. "Hold on," he said. The officer's eyes fluttered open in disbelief. "You, human, you should not be here." "Yeah, I get that a lot," Marcus grunted, bracing his shoulder against the beam. He pushed with all his strength, every muscle screaming in protest. The beam shifted, then finally gave way. The Vraxian gasped, clutching his side. Marcus pulled him free, wrapping him in thermal fabric. "You'll freeze if we stay here, come on." He half-carried, half-dragged the alien back through the snow, his legs burning with exhaustion. Hours later, they reached the cave. Marcus set him by the reactor, turning up the heat. The alien shivered violently, his crystalline skin slowly regaining its glow. "You saved me," the Vraxian rasped, still in disbelief. Marcus poured him a small cup of steaming coffee. "Don't thank me yet, drink." The alien hesitated but took the cup, sniffing the strange aroma. He sipped and blinked. "It is warm." Marcus smiled faintly. "It's called coffee, humanity's greatest invention after fire and bad decisions." For the first time in his exile, there was laughter in the cave, faint, uncertain but real. The Vraxian, whose name was Serac, stayed with him for several days. His wounds healed slowly under Marcus's care. They spoke in broken sentences, bridging the gap between species through shared survival. Serac listened to Marcus's story, his trial, his exile, his defiance. He stared at the reactor and the fortress built from wreckage, the lights glowing against the endless frost. "You made this?" he asked softly. Marcus nodded. "Had to, nobody was going to do it for me." Serac looked into his cup. "You humans, you create warmth where none exists, even in the coldest place." Marcus chuckled. "That's our curse and our gift." When Serac was strong enough to leave, he stood at the mouth of the cave, staring out into the white horizon. "They said you were dead," he said. "I will tell them they were wrong." Marcus looked at him, his eyes steady. "Tell them I'm busy making coffee." The Vraxian bowed deeply, a gesture of respect in his culture, and walked into the storm. Marcus stood there for a while, watching until the shadow vanished. Then he went back inside, poured himself another cup, and whispered, "Now they'll know." Outside, the snow fell gently. Inside, the fire hummed, steady and strong. The frozen zone had taken many lives, but not his. Marcus Hale had done the impossible. He had turned death into life. And now, somewhere out there, word of the human who built fire in the ice was beginning to spread. The frozen zone had no seasons, no sunrise, no true sense of time, only the endless rhythm of wind and storm. Marcus stopped counting days long ago. But he knew years had passed because his reflection had changed. His beard was gray, his eyes sharper. His hands, once clean and steady, were now scarred, hardened by the cold and the work that had kept him alive. The cave had grown into something more, a fortress of heat and steel, humming with the sound of reactors and small generators. He had built wind turbines from broken ship parts, greenhouses glowing faintly under artificial lights, and even a signal array that stretched into the sky like frozen lightning. And of course the coffee machine, his greatest treasure. Marcus sat beside it one morning, staring at the faint steam rising from his cup. "To warmth," he said softly, taking a sip. "To home." He didn't know that far above, in the skis of Vrax Prime, the Council's scanners had detected something impossible, a living heat signature deep inside the frozen zone. When the Vraxian patrol ship landed near his outpost 3 days later, Marcus didn't run. He stood by the fire, watching through the thin crack in the cave's entrance as figures emerged from the storm, tall, armored Vraxians, their weapons glowing blue. The leader stepped forward, his voice echoing through a translator. "Identify yourself. This zone is restricted." Marcus chuckled. "Oh, I know. I was the first one restricted here." The soldiers froze. Then their eyes widened as he stepped out of the cave. The human they had banished years ago stood before them, alive, strong, and calm. His coat was patched with alien armor, his breath rising like smoke in the cold air. One of them whispered, "It can't be. He was supposed to be dead." Marcus grinned. "Supposed to, but humans have a habit of ruining assumptions." They stared at the fortress behind him, the faint glow, the heat, the towers of metal and glass. It looked like a colony, alive and thriving where no life should exist. Their commander finally spoke. "We are ordered to bring you back to the capital. The council demands your presence." Marcus nodded slowly. "Figures, when they can't kill you, they want to question you." He turned back toward his cave, grabbed a small metal flask and tucked it into his jacket. "Fine, let's go, but I'm bringing something with me." When the shuttle landed at the council hall, the entire city turned to watch. The return of the exiled humans spread through the colony like fire in dry air. Crowds gathered near the landing zone, whispering in disbelief as Marcus stepped out. He looked around at the icy towers, the same cold sky, the same people who had once turned their backs on him. Only now their eyes were different. There was fear there and curiosity. The Prime Overseer waited inside the chamber, his expression unreadable. "Captain Marcus Hale," he said slowly, his voice echoing through the hall, "you live." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You sound disappointed." Murmurs rippled through the room. The Overseer's jaw tightened. "No one has ever survived the frozen zone, not even our kind. You were left there for justice, not for miracles." Marcus smirked. "Then you're welcome for the miracle." He reached into his coat and pulled out the metal flask. Every guard tensed, hands on their weapons. Marcus ignored them, unscrewed the lid, and poured steaming liquid into a cup he had brought. A rich, warm smell filled the cold chamber, something the aliens had never known. "This," Marcus said, raising the cup, "is coffee. I found it in one of your crashed transports, and I made it work, because that's what humans do, we make things work." He walked up to the Overseer's throne and placed the cup in front of him. "Taste it." The Overseer hesitated, then lifted the cup with his long fingers. The liquid shimmered in the light. He took a slow sip, and for a brief second his icy composure cracked. His eyes widened slightly. "It's warm," he whispered. Marcus smiled. "It's called flavor, life. It's what happens when you stop fearing change." The hall was silent. Dozens of alien eyes watched him, the exiled man who had returned carrying heat from the dead zone. "You banished me to die," Marcus said, his voice steady but filled with quiet fire. "But I didn't die, I built, I learned, and I made something beautiful out of your punishment, because humans don't just survive, we create, even in the dark." He stepped back, letting his words sink into the silence. "You think strength is cold, controlled, perfect, but real strength is warmth, the will to keep going when everything freezes around you." The Overseer stared into his cup, the steam rising between them. He looked up slowly. "You have changed the impossible. The frozen zone is now alive." Marcus nodded. "You could say I warmed it up a little." Laughter, hesitant but real, rippled through the chamber. The Overseer's eyes softened, the faintest glimmer of respect in his expression. "You will come with us," he said. "The Council will decide what happens next." Marcus shrugged. "Sure, but first I'm setting up a coffee machine in this place. You people need it." He walked past the guards, straight-backed and unafraid, the faint scent of roasted beans lingering in his wake. Outside, the twin suns of Vrax Prime broke through the clouds, casting golden light across the frozen city for the first time in years. And as the warmth touched the towers, something shifted, a feeling subtle but powerful. The legend of the human from the frozen zone had begun to spread. And with it, the fire of a species that refused to die quietly was beginning to thaw the coldest world in the galaxy. The chamber was silent. The scent of coffee lingered in the air like something forbidden, warm, and alive. The Vraxian Council sat frozen in disbelief. No one had ever dared to speak to them the way Marcus Hale just had. He stood at the center of the hall, a man wrapped in a weathered coat, steam rising from the cup in his hand. His hair was streaked with frost and time, yet his eyes burned with that same human fire that refused to fade. The Prime Overseer leaned forward, his cold voice echoing. "You claim survival, but what you call creation could have been luck. Explain to us, human, how did you live in a place that kills even our strongest?" Marcus chuckled softly. "Luck, maybe a little, but mostly grit. You see, we humans don't wait for miracles, we make them." He paced slowly, his boots echoing on the icy floor. Every word carried the weight of truth, and every breath he took left a trail of warmth in the cold air. "When you threw me out there," he said, "I had nothing, no food, no shelter, no reason to hope. But I had my hands, my stubbornness, and a brain that doesn't know when to quit. That's the thing about humans. You bury us and we dig tunnels. You freeze us and we build fire." The room stayed silent. Even the guards lowered their weapons, listening. "I built a home in your wasteland," Marcus continued. "I turned your punishment into a workshop. I hunted, I learned, I fought creatures that lived in the dark. And when I found your reactor buried under the ice, I didn't see danger, I saw a spark. That's what humans do. We see a spark and we build a world around it." He paused, looking at the cup in his hand. "And then I found something else, coffee, a little thing, a small reminder of home. But when I made that first cup, it reminded me who I was. It reminded me that warmth isn't just temperature, it's life. It's defiance." The overseer tilted his head, his icy eyes narrowing. You speak of warmth as though it were strength. Marcus met his gaze. It is. Strength isn't how cold you can be or how long you can rule others through fear. It's how much warmth you can create when everything's gone. It's how much light you can give when the world's dark. You wanted to teach me fear. Instead, you taught me fire. A murmur spread among the council members. Some looked uneasy, others looked thoughtful. One of the younger Vraxians, her voice trembling, spoke up. You built light where none existed. You changed the Deathlands into a place that breathes. What do you call this, defiance? Marcus smiled faintly. I call it humanity. The overseer stood, his towering figure casting a long shadow across the chamber. And what do you wish from us, human? Do you seek revenge, freedom, power? Marcus shook his head. No, I don't need power. I already have what I need, the proof that we belong here. You said humans were reckless, emotional, chaotic. Maybe we are, but we're also builders, dreamers, survivors. We don't follow your rules because we make our own out of necessity. He stepped closer to the overseer, his voice quiet but firm. You exiled me to die, but in doing that you proved what humanity is. We thrive in places that kill everything else. The overseer stared at him for a long moment, then slowly turned toward the rest of the council. He speaks of warmth, yet he stands here alive because of cold discipline. Perhaps both are needed. Marcus smirked. Exactly, you call it balance, we call it survival. The overseer looked down at the steaming cup still in his hand. This drink of yours, it carries the taste of defiance. Marcus nodded, and a bit of forgiveness too, if you let it. The overseer's eyes softened. You would forgive those who condemned you. Marcus looked around the hall at the faces of the beings who once called him a threat. I didn't survive to hate you. I survived to teach you. Hate burns fast. Fire, if you care for it, keeps you alive. The room fell into silence again. This time it wasn't the silence of judgment, it was reflection. Something was changing, something deeper than words. After a long pause, the overseer turned to the guards. Remove the mark of exile from his record. He looked back at Marcus. You have proven that warmth can live even in the coldest hearts. Marcus exhaled slowly, almost in disbelief. Didn't think I'd hear that from you. The overseer raised his cup slightly. And I never thought I would drink something made by a human. A ripple of quiet laughter passed through the hall. For the first time, the ice didn't feel suffocating. It felt like it was melting. Marcus lifted his own cup in return. To survival, he said. The overseer nodded. No, to balance. That night, as Marcus walked out of the chamber and looked up at the twin suns beginning to rise, he saw something he hadn't seen in years. The faint shimmer of life beyond the walls of the capital. Heat signatures, plants, maybe even wildlife spreading from the direction of his old cave. The warmth was growing. He smiled softly, whispering into the wind, guess the fire's catching on. And for the first time, the cold world of Vrax Prime didn't look dead anymore. It looked reborn. The morning light spilled across the icy towers of Vrax Prime, soft and golden. It was rare for sunlight to reach this far north, rarer still for it to feel warm. But today, warmth touched everything, the streets, the domes, and the faces of those who once thought the frozen zone was a graveyard. They all knew why the sun felt different. Because the man they had exiled had returned, and with him he'd brought fire. Marcus Hale stood on the platform overlooking the capital, his coat fluttering in the crisp wind. Below him, Vraxians moved about like they were seeing the world for the first time. The cold didn't bite as sharply anymore. The skis shimmered faintly with color. His eyes lifted toward the horizon, toward the distant mountains where the frozen zone lay. Somewhere out there, his old cave still glowed, powered by the reactor he'd repaired long ago. That little spark had changed everything. Captain Hale, a voice said behind him. He turned. It was Serac, the Vraxian officer he had once saved from the wreckage. Time had changed him too. His skin glowed brighter, his stance more confident. The council requests your presence, Serac said, though there was warmth in his tone this time. They want you to see something. Marcus smiled faintly. As long as it's not another trial I'm in. They walked together through the capital's main avenue. Where once there had been frost and silence, there was now life. Merchants selling strange, glowing plants that could survive the cold, children laughing as they chased each other across the thawing streets, and groups of engineers setting up solar towers inspired by his old designs. At the center of the city, a new monument stood, a tall bronze statue of a man in a tattered coat, holding a cup raised high. At its base, engraved in both Vraxian and English, were the words, "To the one who brought warmth to the coldest world." Marcus stopped, his breath catching. "You built this for me." Sarek nodded. "The council wanted to remind our people what you taught us. That warmth is not weakness. That creation is not chaos. You gave us something our world had lost, hope." Marcus looked up at the statue again, the rising suns gleaming on its bronze surface. "Hope," he murmured. "It's a funny thing. You can't touch it, but it burns stronger than fire." They continued into the council hall, now transformed. The cold blue light that once filled the chamber had been replaced by soft gold and green. The overseer sat at the center, not on a throne but at a round table, the first time in Vraxian history that such equality was shown. "Captain Hale," the overseer greeted him. "Or should I say Ambassador Hale?" Marcus blinked. "Ambassador." The overseer nodded. "You have proven that humanity's way of life, your warmth, your invention, your courage, can coexist with ours. The council has voted to welcome Earth into alliance with Vrax Prime. You will be our first link." For a moment, Marcus couldn't speak. He had dreamed of returning home, yes, but never imagined returning like this. Not as a soldier, not as a survivor, but as a bridge. He smiled slowly. "You realize Earth, going to want a lot of coffee in exchange." The overseer tilted his head. "Then we shall grow it together." The chamber filled with soft laughter. Weeks passed. The frozen zone was no longer forbidden. Vraxian engineers, guided by Marcus's notes, built geothermal reactors under the ice. They discovered minerals, ancient structures, and a strange new ecosystem that had begun to grow in the warmth his reactor released. What was once a land of death had become a cradle of new life. And in the middle of it all, on the ridge above his old cave, Marcus built something simple but powerful, a small cafe made of metal and glass. The sign above the door read, "The Frozen Brew." It became a place of peace. Humans from visiting ships and Vraxians alike gathered there to share warmth, trade stories, and laugh over steaming cups. Marcus worked behind the counter, still wearing his old coat, still using that same dented pot from the cave. When curious travelers asked him how it all began, he'd pour them a cup and say, "It started with being told I'd never make it." He'd glance out the window toward the ice plains and smile. And now look. Outside, fields of pale green plants swayed gently in the wind, the first crops ever grown on Vrax Prime. One evening, as the twin suns dipped below the horizon, Sarek joined him on the ridge. "You never went home," Sarek said quietly. Marcus watched the light fade, his cup steaming in his hands. "Home isn't a place," he said softly. "It's the warmth you make when the world's cold." Sarek nodded slowly, understanding. "Then this is your home now." Marcus smiled. "Guess it is." They stood there in silence as night fell, two beings from two worlds, united by the simple fire of survival and friendship. Far below, the lights of the capital shimmered like stars on the snow. The world had changed, all because one human refused to give up. Years later, travelers from across the galaxy would come to see the frozen brew. Some came for the story, others for the taste of the famous coffee that defied the cold. But all who came left with something more, a sense of warmth that followed them wherever they went. And on the plaque by the door, beneath the cafe's name, were the final words of the man who had changed everything. "They banished me to the ice, but I brought back fire. Not to burn, but to remind the stars how to shine." The wind howled across the tundra, soft and distant, carrying with it the faint smell of coffee. The frozen zone, once a tomb, now pulsed with life. And in its heart, the fire of one human, stubborn, kind, unyielding, burned forever. The fire that never dies.